Sarah Dawson's hands were bleeding. She drove another fence post into ground that had frozen overnight, then thawed, mean by noon. The wire bit through cloth she'd wrapped around her palms, strips torn from a dead man's shirt. She didn't stop. Across the fence line, Cole Maddox sat his horse and watched. He'd come by 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time, she turned her back. Each time, he left firewood by her gate anyway. This morning, he brought his coat. The sky behind him looked wrong, green-gray and moving too fast. Ravens flew low and frantic the way they do when weather's about to turn. "Ma'am," his voice came quiet, respectful. "Storm's coming in tonight. Bad one." Sarah hammered another post. Iron rang against iron. "I'm not yours to worry about, Mr. Maddox." He looked at her a long moment. Then he laid his sheepskin coat careful on the fence post between them and turned his horse toward home. Sarah stared at that coat for 5 full minutes. Then she picked it up and threw it in the mud. 3 weeks earlier. Sweetwater General Store. Cole Maddox stood at the counter counting out coins for winter supplies. Flour, salt, lamp oil, coffee. Enough for one man who didn't think much past March. Eleanor Pruitt marked his order in her ledger with the careful script of a woman who'd been keeping books since before Wyoming was a territory. She was 52 and built like a fence post, all angles and iron will. Planning to hibernate? Cole? Just stocking up, ma'am. For one. She didn't make it a question. You've been buying supplies for one person going on 3 years now. That ranch of yours got 8 rooms and you're living in 2 of them? Cole didn't answer. He loaded his saddlebags with the kind of focus a man uses when he doesn't want to have a conversation. Eleanor watched him over her spectacles. Grief's one thing, but what you're doing looks more like penance. His hand stopped on the buckle. She wouldn't want you living like this, Cole. Rebecca was a lot of things, but cruel wasn't one of them. The door opened before he could answer. Sarah Dawson stepped inside, moving like someone crossing a frozen river. Each step tested before weight shifted. Her dress had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to guess. She kept her eyes on the floor. "Morning, Sarah." Eleanor's voice gentled the way it did with wounded things. "Ma'am." Sarah's voice barely carried across the store. She had a list written on the back of an old envelope, the kind with someone else's address crossed out. Cole pretended to adjust his gear, but he watched. Sarah bought a half-pound of cornmeal, 2 candles, and a box of matches. That was all. She counted out coins twice, lips moving silent, making certain she had enough. When she left, the door closed on a silence that felt like held breath. "That girl's gonna freeze to death out there," Eleanor said. Not to Cole, exactly. Just speaking truth into air that needed to hear it. Been alone since Silas died last spring. Won't take charity, won't take help, won't take advice worth a damn. Cole watched through the window as Sarah tied her purchases to a mule that looked as tired as she did. She got people? Not a soul in this territory. Eleanor started shelving cans with more force than necessary. Parents died of cholera back in '72. Married Silas Dawson when she was just 17, and that man worked her like a mule and talked to her worse. When he fell off that horse drunk last April, she didn't cry at the funeral. Didn't even pretend. Where's her place? 5 miles west of yours. Got 160 acres with good water, but the cabin's falling apart around her ears. She's 3 months behind on taxes. Eleanor looked at him direct. Why you asking? No reason. Cole Maddox, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. You don't ask questions for no reason. He picked up his saddlebags. The leather creaked the way old leather does, familiar and honest. Just seems like somebody ought to check on her. Somebody ought to, Eleanor agreed. But she won't let you. That girl's got walls higher than the Tetons, and every one of them got barbed wire on top. Cole paused at the door. Walls are just things people build when they're scared of what's outside them. Eleanor watched him mount his horse and turn west instead of east toward home. She shook her head and smiled the way a woman smiles when she sees the future coming, whether folks are ready or not. Lord help them both, she said to the empty store. 2 days later, Sarah's homestead. Cole rode up slow with his hands visible on the reins. Sarah was on a ladder, leaned against her cabin, trying to patch a hole in the roof with wood that looked like it came from a torn-down fence. Ma'am. He stopped his horse a respectful 30 feet back. Name's Cole Maddox. I ranch about 5 miles east of here. Wanted to introduce myself, being neighbors and all. Sarah didn't come down from the ladder. I know who you are. Yes, ma'am. He waited. The wind moved through the scrub grass, making sounds like whispered warnings. When she didn't say anything else, he continued. Noticed your woodpile's running a little low. Winter's coming early this year. You can see it in how the animals are behaving. I've got extra cordwood if you need. I don't need charity, Mr. Maddox. Her voice had an edge that spoke of other men, other offers. Other debts, called due when you couldn't pay in cash. Wasn't offering charity, ma'am. Was suggesting a trade. You got good water on your land. My south pasture's been running dry the past month. Thought maybe we could work something out. Now she did look at him. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds rolling in over flat land, gray and hard and ready for trouble. I'm not trading anything with you. Fair enough? He touched the brim of his hat. Just thought I'd ask. He turned his horse to leave, then paused. If you change your mind about that water trade, you know where to find me. I won't. Cole nodded once and rode away at an easy walk. But when Sarah climbed down from that ladder an hour later, there was a cord of split firewood stacked neat by her barn. No note, no string attached. Just wood that would burn. She stood looking at it as the sun dropped low and turned the sky the color of a healing bruise. Her jaw clenched so tight her teeth hurt. That night, she lay awake in her cabin, listening to wind howl through cracks she couldn't afford to fix. She thought about that firewood. Thought about the way Cole Maddox had kept his distance, kept his voice level, kept his hands where she could see them. And she hated that it mattered. She hated that some small, starving part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, not every man's kindness came with a bill attached. But she'd believed that once before. It had cost her everything except her life. And some days she wasn't sure that was enough to be grateful for. She decided then she'd rather freeze to death than owe any man anything, even if he seemed different. Especially if he seemed different. That's how they got you. Cole came back the following week. And the week after that, always with an excuse that didn't quite hold water if you looked at it too close. Thought you might want this fence wire. Got extra from a bulk order. I found this harness mending kit in my barn. Don't need two. Well, I saw your chimney smoking strange yesterday evening. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't blocked. Sarah refused everything. Set her jaw and shook her head and went back to whatever work was killing her that particular day. But she stopped throwing his offerings in the mud, started leaving them on the fence post where he'd set them, let the wind decide whether they stayed or went. That was something. It was the day her mule went lame that things changed. Sarah was trying to drag a broken plow blade back to the barn by herself. 200 pounds of rusted iron that caught on every rock and rut. Her face had gone red with strain and something deeper than exertion. Rage at her own weakness, fury at needing help she couldn't ask for. Cole rode up, saw what she was doing, and dismounted without asking permission. He took hold of the chains. "Let go," she snapped. "No, ma'am. I said let go, and I said no." His voice stayed quiet, but something in it had turned to bedrock. "You're gonna hurt yourself, and then where will you be? Let me help you get this to the barn. After that, I'll leave. You got my word." Something about the way he said "you got my word" made her hands loosen on the chains. They dragged the plow blade together without speaking. The only sounds were their boots in dirt, the scrape of iron, the occasional grunt of effort. When they reached the barn, Cole set the blade down careful and wiped his hands on his pants. He turned to go. "Why?" Sarah's voice came out rougher than she meant it to. Cole stopped. "Why what? Why do you keep coming here? What do you want from me?" He was quiet for a long moment, looked out at the horizon, where mountains went purple in afternoon light. When he spoke, his voice had gone soft in a way that made Sarah think of church, though she hadn't been to one in years. "I had a wife once, Rebecca. She died 3 years ago, having our baby." He paused, drew breath like a man surfacing from deep water. "Little girl, named her Rose." Sarah went still as stone. "I wasn't there when it happened. Was up in the high country, moving cattle. Needed the money, thought I had time." "Ow." He looked at his hands like they'd failed some essential test. By the time I got back, they were both gone. Doctor said there wasn't anything I could have done. Maybe that's true, but I wasn't there to try. He lifted his eyes to hers. What Sarah saw there was something she recognized. Guilt that doesn't wash off no matter how hard you scrub. So when I see somebody struggling and I got the means to help, I help. Not because I want something from you, Mrs. Dawson. Because I need to know I'm still the kind of man who shows up when it matters. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Sarah standing in her barn doorway, with tears she refused to shed burning hot behind her eyes. That night, she sat by her pathetic fire wrapped in a blanket that had more holes than wool. For the first time since Silas died, she let herself think about Cole Maddox. She'd assumed he was like her husband, like every other man who'd looked at a woman alone and seen opportunity wearing a different dress. But Cole Maddox didn't look at her like opportunity. He looked at her like she was a person who needed firewood and a roof that didn't leak. Like her surviving the winter mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with what he could get from her. That was somehow worse than if he'd wanted something, because she knew how to fight off a man who wanted to own her. She'd done it with Silas every day for 5 years, until God or chance or mercy sent that bad horse into his path. But a man who just wanted to help, who asked for nothing, who kept his word and his distance. That was dangerous in a way Sarah didn't have defenses for. It made her want to trust, and trust was how you ended up bleeding. 2 days later, Sweetwater, Sarah had to ride into town to sell her last 2 laying hens. She needed money for taxes, needed it desperate, but the $12 offered felt like robbery for 2 good birds that laid regular. She stood outside the general store holding the crate, trying not to let anyone see her hands shake. Sarah Dawson, those birds are worth at least 20 and you know it. Eleanor Pruitt stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her face set in that expression that said, argument was welcome but wouldn't change anything. No one's offering 20, Mrs. Pruitt. I am. Right now, $20 cash. Sarah's throat tightened. I don't take charity. It ain't charity, girl. It's fair price for good livestock. Eleanor counted out the bills with the efficiency of long practice. Now take the money before I change my mind and realize I'm too old to be keeping chickens anyway. Sarah took the money. Her hands were shaking harder now. As she turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. That Cole Maddox is a good man, Sarah. Best man I know, and I've known a lot of men. Most of them disappointing. Sarah didn't answer. Just climbed onto her tired mule and rode home through air that had started to smell like coming snow. But that night, when she counted her money by candlelight, $20 from the chickens, 18 more she'd scraped together selling her wedding ring to a peddler who didn't ask questions. She thought about Cole's face when he'd talked about his wife and baby. Thought about the way he'd helped with the plow without making her feel small. Thought about the firewood that kept appearing, the fence wire, the careful distance he always maintained. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Dawson let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about something. She fell asleep that night, almost feeling safe. That's when the storm warning started. The sky the next morning looked wrong. Cole stood in his kitchen with coffee growing cold in his hand, watching clouds move in from the north. They came in a solid wall of gray-green that sat low and mean against the horizon, moving too fast. Wrong color, wrong shape? His grandfather used to call storms like this widowmakers, the kind that buried cattle, standing up and turned homesteads into graves. He thought about Sarah Dawson in that failing cabin with gaps in the walls you could see daylight through. Thought about her pathetic woodpile and her pride that wouldn't bend, even when bending was the difference between living and dying. He saddled his horse before the thought finished forming. Sarah's homestead. Late morning. Sarah was reinforcing the barn door with scrap lumber when she heard hoofbeats. She knew the sound of his horse by now, tried to tell herself that didn't mean anything. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Dawson. He swung down, still wearing his heavy winter coat, the sheepskin-lined one that cost more than most men made in a month. Storm's coming. Bad one. You can see it in the sky. I've got eyes. Yes, ma'am, I'm sure you do. He looked at her cabin, at the walls stuffed with rags and newspaper, at the chimney that barely drew smoke even on calm days. His jaw worked like he was chewing words too big to swallow. That cabin won't hold against what's coming. Aisha, it's held this long. Not against this. The careful calm had left his voice. Something urgent pushed through now, something close to fear. Mrs. Dawson, Sarah, this storm's gonna kill people. I've seen them before. Temperature'll drop 30 degrees in an hour. Wind strong enough to carry off livestock. You can't... I'll be fine. No. He stepped closer. She saw real terror in his face. Not for himself, for her. No, you won't. That cabin's got more holes than walls. Your woodpile won't last the night. And if your fire goes out and cold like that, then I'll light it again. What if you can't? His hands had clenched into fists at his sides. What if the wind's too strong? What if your matches get damp? What if... He stopped himself, took a breath that looked like it hurt going down. Please, come stay at my place. I've got a solid house. Good stove. Plenty of wood. You can have the bedroom. I'll sleep in the barn. You won't even have to see me except at meals. Just please, don't do this. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, at the genuine terror in his face, at the way his whole body had gone tight with the effort of not just throwing her over his saddle and riding, off whether she agreed or not. Every instinct in her body screamed the same warning. This is how it starts. This is how they get control. First it's for your own good, then it's you owe me, then it's you're mine and you'll do what I say. No. Sarah, I said no. Her voice cracked like breaking ice. I don't need your house. I don't need your help. I don't need you showing up here every week, trying to save me like I'm some helpless thing that can't take care of herself. Cole went very still, the kind of still that speaks of things held down by main force. That's not what I'm... Oh, I know what you're doing. I know how this works. The words came out hot and bitter as bad coffee. You help me, and then I owe you, and then you own me. Well, I've been owned before, Mr. Maddox, and I'd rather freeze to death than let it happen again. The words hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Cole's face did something complicated. Hurt and understanding and frustration bleeding into each other until you couldn't tell where one ended and another began. When he spoke again, his voice came barely above a whisper. I'm not him. I don't care. Sarah, go home, Mr. Maddox. Take care of your own place. I'll take care of mine. For a moment, she thought he would argue, thought he might even try to force her. Her whole body tensed, ready to fight or run or do whatever it took to keep her freedom. But he didn't. He just stood there, this big, quiet man with grief carved into every line of his face, and nodded once. All right. He walked back to his horse, mounted up slow like his bones had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Then he did something that broke her heart in a way she hadn't expected and didn't know how to process. He took off his heavy winter coat, the good one, the expensive one, the one that might be the difference between living and dying in cold like what was coming. He draped it careful over her fence post. Cole, it's not charity. His back stayed turned to her. It's not a loan. It's not a trade. It's just a coat, Mrs. Dawson. And it's going to be colder than hell tonight. So if you got any sense at all, you'll use it. He rode away without looking back. Sarah stared at that coat for a long time. The wind was already picking up, carrying the smell of snow and something else, something wild and dangerous that made animals run for cover. She walked over to the fence post, touched the coat. It was still warm from his body. She picked it up, held it to her face for just a second, and caught the scent of wood smoke and leather and something she couldn't name. Something that felt like safety might feel if safety was real and not just a lie men told. Then she folded it careful and took it inside. That night, by midnight, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. By 2 in the morning, the wind was screaming like something alive and furious. By 3, Sarah's fire went out. She tried to relight it, struck match after match. But the wind howled through the gaps in her walls so fierce that every flame died before it could catch. Her hands were shaking, not just from cold, from fear. She was wrapped in every blanket she owned, plus Cole's coat, and she still couldn't stop shaking. The matches were running out. The cold was getting in. And Sarah Dawson finally understood what Cole had been trying to tell her. Pride was a luxury. Winter didn't care about your feelings. The last match went out in her trembling fingers. Darkness swallowed the cabin whole, and outside, the storm screamed on. The cold came in like something with teeth. Sarah huddled under every blanket she owned, which wasn't many, and tried to restart the fire. But every time she got kindling arranged, every time she struck a match that actually lit, the wind howling through her walls blew it out before it could catch. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was worse than the shaking. It meant her body was giving up, shutting down, deciding which parts were worth keeping warm and which could be sacrificed to the cold. She was going to die here. The thought came clear and simple, and instead of panic, what she felt was something close to relief. At least dying alone meant she'd kept her promise to herself. Never again would she belong to a man who confused ownership with love. 5 years ago, spring 1873, Sarah had been 17 when she married Silas Dawson. Her parents were 6 months dead from cholera. She had no siblings, no money, nowhere to go. The banker had given her 2 weeks to vacate the house before it went to auction. Silas had a homestead claim and a smile that made promises his eyes never kept. The smile lasted 3 weeks into the marriage. After that came the rules. A wife walks 3 steps behind her husband. That's Bible. A wife don't speak unless spoken to. That's respect. A wife's body belongs to her husband. It ain't hers to refuse. He never hit her. Didn't have to. He owned her in every other way that mattered. She remembered the spring she'd tried to plant a garden. Just something small. Just vegetables for the winter. She'd spent a week turning soil, planting seeds, watering them careful at dawn before the heat came. Silas had come home and found her kneeling in the dirt, hands muddy, face lit with something like hope. He'd walked into that garden and ripped every seedling up with his bare hands, thrown them in a pile at her feet. You don't do nothing on this land without asking me first. You understand? This land is mine. This cabin is mine. You're mine, Sarah. Everything you touch is mine to allow or forbid. She'd stopped trying to plant things after that, stopped trying to have opinions, stopped trying to be anything except small and quiet and obedient enough that he might forget she was there. When Silas died, drunk, trying to break a horse that was too much animal for him to handle, the first thing Sarah felt was freedom. The second thing was terror that she'd never feel free again, because freedom meant being alone. And being alone meant depending on no one, and depending on no one meant never being owned, even if it killed her, especially if it killed her. Present. Sarah's cabin, 4 a.m. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. The cabin was so dark she couldn't see her own hands. The wind had stopped howling. Now it just screamed, One sustained shriek like the voice of something that wanted her dead and wouldn't stop until it got what it came for. Sarah's mind started to wander in the way minds do when hypothermia takes hold. Thoughts came loose and strange, disconnected from sense. She thought about Cole Maddox, about the way he looked at her when he said, "I'm not him." And in the delirium that comes right before the body surrenders completely, Sarah Dawson had one single, shattering thought. What if I was wrong? What if the prison she'd been living in wasn't the one Silas built? What if it was the one she'd built herself, using his bones for walls and his voice for bars? What if Cole really was just a man who'd lost everything and couldn't stand to watch someone else lose everything too? What if help wasn't control, it was just help? What if she'd been so afraid of being owned that she'd forgotten how to be human? What if the door exploded inward? No, that wasn't right. It was frozen shut. Someone was kicking it over and over. The sound came from far away, like it was happening to someone else in some other life. Then hands. Warm hands that burned against her frozen skin. A voice saying her name like a prayer and a curse, all tangled together. "Sarah, Sarah, stay with me. Come on, girl, stay with me." She tried to say she was sorry, tried to say she understood now, tried to say she'd been wrong about everything, but her mouth wouldn't work. Her tongue felt thick and foreign, then heat, sudden, overwhelming heat that hurt worse than the cold ever had. Someone's body wrapped around hers. Someone's coat, no, two coats, covering them both. Someone's voice in her ear, rough with exhaustion and fear and something that sounded like it might break if she stopped breathing. I got you, you're okay, I'm here, I got you." She knew that voice. She'd been hearing it in her head for weeks now, even when he wasn't there. Even when she'd told him to leave and never come back. The last thought she had before unconsciousness took her again was simple. He came back. Even after I threw his kindness in the mud. Even after I told him I'd rather die. Even after everything, he came back. Somewhere between darkness and dawn, when consciousness flickered back, seconds or hours later, she couldn't tell. She didn't know if she was alive or dead. All she knew was she wasn't cold anymore, and someone was breathing beside her, steady and slow and real. Sarah's eyes opened slow. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt it. Warmth. A fire crackling. The weight of heavy coats piled on top of her. She tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. Every muscle locked tight from hours of violent shivering. "Easy." Cole's voice came rough with exhaustion. "Don't move too fast, you're still warming up." When she turned her head, he was sitting on the floor about 3 feet away, his back against the wall. He'd wrapped himself in a single thin blanket. His face was pale as new snow. His lips had a blue tinge at the edges. He was wearing only his shirt and vest. "You gave me..." Her voice came out like broken glass. "Both coats." "Yeah." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You needed them more." Sarah looked around the cabin. The fire was burning strong. There was a pile of broken wood in the corner, her chair, her small side table, pieces of her bed frame. He'd burned her furniture to keep the fire alive. His hands were raw and bleeding from breaking frozen wood. "How long?" "You've been out about 3 hours. Storm's still going." He paused. "Worst of it hit around 4. You were..." His voice caught. "You were so cold, Sarah. Couldn't stop shaking. Took me near an hour to get you warm enough that the shaking stopped." She saw it then. The terror still living in his face. The way his hands trembled slightly even now. He'd thought he was going to lose her. "You could have died getting here. Probably. You should have left me." "No." Simple. Absolute. That wasn't ever going to happen. Something broke inside her then. Some last wall she'd been holding up through pure stubbornness. Tears came hot and fast. The first real tears she'd cried in 3 years. "You could have died, Cole. You almost..." She couldn't finish. He moved closer. Slow, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. "But I didn't. We didn't." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you risk your life for someone who told you to leave? Who threw your kindness back in your face?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had dropped to a steady moan. "Because you matter, Sarah." 3 words, that was all. But the way he said them, like it was the simplest truth in the world, made her cry harder. "I don't understand you." She wiped at her face with shaking hands. "I don't understand how you can be this way." "What way?" "Kind without wanting something back. Patient, when I've given you nothing but rejection. You keep showing up even when..." Her voice broke again. "Even when I'd rather die than accept help." Cole looked at his bleeding hands. "You want to know why I'm this way?" "Yes." "Because I wasn't." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I wasn't this way when it mattered most." The story came out slow, like something he'd kept locked up so long it had fossilized. Rebecca had been pregnant. difficult from the start. Baby was breech. The local doctor said it might not come natural. Said Cole should take her to Cheyenne, where there was a real hospital. But that cost money they didn't have. So Cole took a cattle drive. Dangerous work in rough country, but it paid double. 3 weeks. He told Rebecca he'd be back before the baby came. He wasn't. Rebecca went into labor early. The barber who pulled teeth and set bones tried to help, but he wasn't a real doctor. She bled for 12 hours. The baby finally came. Breech, just like the doctor said. Little Rose lived 4 days. By the time Cole got back, they were both buried under the cottonwood. Neighbor woman who'd been helping Mrs. Garrett, she told me something I can't forget. His voice had gone hollow. Said Rebecca called for me. Every hour of those 12 hours, she'd cry out, "Where's Cole? When's Cole coming?" Right up until... He stopped, swallowed hard. She died still waiting for me to show up. A tear ran down his face. He didn't wipe it away. I chose money over being there. Chose providing over presence. And she died alone calling my name. His hands clenched. So when I see someone alone, someone struggling, I can't leave. I physically cannot make myself walk away. Because maybe if I show up for enough people, maybe one day I'll forgive myself for not showing up for her. And Sarah saw it then. The full shape of his wound. It matched hers in a terrible way. Different edges, same depth. She'd chosen independence over accepting help. He'd chosen providing over presence. Both their choices had almost killed the people they loved. She'd almost killed herself. He'd almost killed his wife. At least, that's what he believed in the darkest hours. Sarah reached out. It took everything she had, but she took his hand, rough and bleeding and cold, in hers. She wouldn't want you suffering like this, Cole. He broke then. This big, quiet, restrained man who'd carried his grief like stones in his pockets for 3 years. He broke. He bent forward and sobbed like something vital had torn loose inside him, deep tearing sounds that spoke of pain that had no words. Sarah pulled him closer, wrapped her arms around him, let him cry into her shoulder while the storm raged outside, and the fire crackled and everything that had been frozen between them finally thawed. They sat together on the floor as dawn tried to break through storm clouds, both wrapped in coats that smelled like each other now. Both cried out and emptied and somehow more whole than they'd been in years. "I thought you wanted to own me," Sarah said finally. "I thought every man who helped wanted something back." "I know. I couldn't see the difference between Silas and you." Her voice was steadier now. "I was so scared of being trapped, I trapped myself. Almost died because I couldn't tell the difference between a cage and a door." Cole's hand tightened on hers. "You had reason to be scared. What he did to you, that wasn't love. That was captivity. But not every man is him. No." He looked at her directly. "Some of us just want folks we care about to be warm and fed and safe. That's not owning, Sarah. That's just caring." She studied his face. The exhaustion, the honesty, the complete lack of expectation. "How do you tell the difference between a man who cares and a man who claims?" Cole thought about that. A man who cares asks what you need. A man who claims tells you what you need. A man who cares accepts when you say no. A man who claims punishes you for saying no. He paused. A man who cares wants you to grow. A man who claims wants you to shrink. Sarah absorbed this, turned it over in her mind like a stone she was learning the shape of. Everything Cole had done. Asked, accepted her no, backed off when she demanded it. He'd never punished her refusals. Never demanded anything. Never tried to make her smaller so he could feel bigger. He'd just kept showing up, kept offering, kept his word and his distance. And when she'd been dying, he'd come through a killer storm to save her. Not because he owned her, but because she mattered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For making you think you had to earn the right to be kind. For throwing your coat in the mud. For..." Her voice broke. "For being so broken I almost got us both killed." "Hey." He turned to face her fully. "You're not broken, Sarah. You're healing. There's a difference." Outside, the wind picked up again. The fire was burning lower. Cole looked at the remaining woodpile, what little was left. "Storm's getting worse," he said quietly. "Wood won't last more than a few hours." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. They might not make it after all, but something had changed. She wasn't facing death alone anymore. And somehow that made all the difference. She tightened her grip on his hand. "Then we'll face it together." Cole looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since Rebecca died, he let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than his grief. They sat in the firelight as the storm screamed. Two broken people who'd been alone so long, they'd forgotten what together felt like. But they were learning, and that was enough. The storm settled into a rhythm, not quieter, just steady. The kind of wind that stops sounding like wind and starts sounding like the bass line of the world. They didn't talk much after that, just sat in the strange, peace that comes after people have seen each other's deepest wounds and decided not to look away. Cole fed the fire careful, breaking furniture piece by piece. Each time he'd pause and look at Sarah like asking permission to burn her life. She just nodded. When he hesitated over her mother's rocking chair, the one thing left from before, Sarah spoke. Burn it. Sarah, I'd rather have warmth than ghosts. She meant it. Burn it all if you need to. He broke the chair into pieces, fed them slow to the flames. They watched it burn together, this thing that had held her mother, then held Sarah through 5 years of marriage. She'd survived rather than lived. Watching it burn felt like letting go of something she'd been carrying too long. The food situation was grim. Sarah had cornmeal and nothing else. Cole had jerky in his saddlebag, tough as leather and salt preserved. They made thin mush from the cornmeal, cooked it in her one pot, mixed in small bits of jerky for flavor. It wasn't much, but it was hot. And they shared it from one bowl with one spoon because she only had one of each. There was something intimate about that, taking turns, waiting while the other ate. Not from romance, but from survival, from being two people in a crisis who'd decided not to face it alone. Cole ate less than his share. Sarah noticed, but didn't call him on it until the third time he passed the bowl back with food still in it. You need to eat. So do you. I'm smaller, need less. She pushed the bowl back. Eat, Cole. He did. But she saw the way he measured each bite, making it last, making sure there'd be enough. It reminded her that taking care wasn't about control. Sometimes it was just about making sure the person beside you didn't go hungry. Afternoon came gray and endless. The storm showed no signs of breaking. They'd burned through most of Sarah's furniture. What remained wouldn't last past dark. Cole sat by the fire, feeding it careful. Sarah watched his hands, still bleeding in places, cracked from cold. Without thinking too hard about it, she tore strips from her dress hem. Old fabric, mended too many times to count anyway. Give me your hands. He looked at her. They're torn up. Let me wrap them. Cole held out his hands like a child might. Sarah wound the cloth around his palms, covering the worst of the damage. Her fingers were gentle in a way she hadn't known she still remembered how to be. Thank you, he said quiet. She tied off the last strip, didn't let go right away. Just sat there holding his wrapped hands in hers, feeling his pulse beat steady under her fingers. Alive. They were both still alive. What was she like? Sarah asked after a long silence. Rebecca? Cole didn't answer right away. Stared at the fire, like it might have answers written in the flames. She laughed easy, he said finally. Made friends with everyone. Saw good in people I couldn't see. Wanted 6 kids in a big noisy house. His voice went soft. She would have been a wonderful mother. Sarah heard what he didn't say. She should have had the chance. Tell me about Rose. Cole's breath caught. He'd told people his wife and daughter died, but he'd never talked about Rose. Not really, not the details that made her real. She had Rebecca's dark hair, these tiny fingers that had gripped my thumb like she knew me. He stared at his wrapped hands. Her eyes never quite opened all the way. Doctor said that was normal for early babies. Said they'd open proper after a few days. But they didn't. No, his voice was barely there. She lived 4 days. Neighbor women took turns holding her while I sat there useless. On the 4th morning, she just stopped breathing, quiet, like going to sleep. I was holding her when it happened. Sarah's hand tightened on his. Buried her in Rebecca's arms. Same coffin. Thought, his voice broke. Thought at least they'd be together. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and the storm moaned, and 2 people grieved for losses that couldn't be fixed. After a long while, Cole spoke. Did you ever want children? The question surprised her. Once, maybe, but not with Silas. No, she looked at her hands. I couldn't bring a child into that. Couldn't let him own them the way he owned me. You got pregnant. He said it gentle, not asking. Once. First year of marriage. Lost it at 8 weeks. She paused. Silas said I couldn't even do that right. That even my body knew I wasn't worth carrying life. Cole made a sound low in his throat like someone had hit him. And I felt, Sarah's voice trembled. I felt relieved that it was gone, that I wouldn't have to watch him break a child the way he was breaking me. Then I felt guilty about the relief. Grief for a baby, I couldn't let myself mourn, because mourning meant admitting I wanted it. Sarah. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She tried to smile, but it came out broken. You lost children you desperately wanted. I lost a child I couldn't let myself want. Different sides of the same wound. Cole pulled her closer. Not romantic, just human. 2 people who'd been carrying their griefs alone for so long they'd forgotten what shared weight felt like. Maybe that's why we understand each other, he said. We've both been robbed. The fire was burning low again. Cole looked at the remaining wood. her bed frame, last piece of furniture. Once that was gone, there'd be nothing left to burn but the cabin itself. He started to add wood. Sarah stopped him. Wait. Sarah, we need… I know. She looked at him directly. But I need to say something first. He waited. I don't want to die alone anymore, Cole. The words hung in the air between them. Simple, true, terrifying. You're not alone, he said. Not anymore. Not if you don't want to be. The choice. He was giving her the choice. Not claiming, not promising, not demanding, just offering. Sarah reached out, took his hand, held it like it was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The hand-holding said everything that mattered. I choose this. I choose you here. I choose not dying alone. The fire dropped to embers. The wood was gone. The cold started seeping back in. They curled together under both coats, his and hers, and Sarah felt Cole's heart beating steady against her back, felt his breath warm on her neck. Felt, for the first time in 3 years, like maybe survival wasn't the same thing as living. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn the difference. The fire died to embers around midnight. There was nothing left to burn. Every stick of furniture was ash. Sarah's blankets were wool. They'd smoke and stink but wouldn't give heat. The walls and floorboards couldn't be touched without bringing the whole cabin down. Cole stared at the dying coals like he was doing arithmetic that wouldn't come out right. No matter how many times he worked it, Sarah watched him think, saw the exact moment he made a decision. He started putting on his coat. What are you doing? Barn's 30 feet from here. My horse is in there with his saddle still on. I didn't have time to pull it when I came for you. Saddle's got a wool blanket underneath. Might be oilcloth in the bags too. Enough to keep this fire going a few more hours till the storm breaks. Sarah's blood went cold for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. You'll die out there, unless maybe. He tied his coat tight. But we'll definitely die in here if I don't try. No. She stood up, wobbly from weakness but determined. Her voice came out hard as iron. I didn't survive hypothermia just to watch you die in a blizzard. Sarah. I said no. She stepped between him and the door. We stay here. Together. Whatever happens. Cole's jaw worked. If I can get that blanket, if I can get oilcloth and matches, we make it till morning. I know I can do this. And if you get turned around? Her voice rose. If you can't find your way back, 30 feet and zero visibility might as well be 30 miles. I won't let you die for me, Cole. The words came out fierce, final. I've spent 3 years pushing you away, she said. I'm not losing you now. They stood facing each other. The fire was down to a handful of coals that wouldn't last another hour. Outside, the storm howled like it knew they were trapped and liked it that way. Cole could overpower her. She was weak. He was strong. He could tie her up if he had to, go out there anyway. But he wouldn't, because that wasn't who he was. He respected her no, even when it might kill them both. Then what do you suggest? His voice was steady, but she heard the fear underneath. Because sitting here and freezing to death together isn't an option I can accept. Sarah thought fast. We go together. What? Rope ourselves to each other. If we get lost together. But I'm not sitting here watching that door, wondering if you're dead in the snow somewhere. Cole started to argue, then stopped. Because she was right about one thing. If he went alone and didn't come back, she'd die anyway, just slower. Just watching the door and hoping. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, but we do this my way. You hold on to me. If you fall, I feel it through the rope. If I fall, you pull me back. And if we both fall, then we fall together. They found rope in the corner, old hemp, coarse and stiff. Cole tied it around both their waists with knots that wouldn't slip, 3 feet of line between them. He wrapped cloth around their faces, tied their coats as tight as they'd go, took the last burning log from the fire as a torch. It wouldn't last long, but it might give them direction. Sarah memorized the angle from door to barn. Cole memorized what her hand felt like in his, just in case. He pulled the door open. The wind exploded inward with a scream that felt personal. The torch nearly went out. The fire in the cabin dropped to nothing. They stumbled out together into white. The world disappeared. Sarah couldn't see Cole, and he was 3 feet in front of her. Couldn't see her own feet. Couldn't see anything except white on white on white. The cold hit like a fist. Even through the coats, even with cloth wrapped around her face, it felt like breathing knives. Cole started counting steps. She felt his voice more than heard it. 1, 2, 3. She held onto his belt with both hands. The rope between them stayed taut. If it went slack, one of them had fallen. 4, 5, 6. The wind knocked Sarah sideways. She felt herself going down. The rope caught her. Cole's weight pulled her upright. She grabbed his belt again. 7, 8, 9. They should have hit the barn wall by now. Either they were off course, or the barn was gone. Wind could have collapsed it, torn it apart, scattered it across Wyoming. Cole stopped. Sarah's heart stopped with him. Then she saw it, a dark shape in the white, solid, real. They crashed into the barn wall like drowning people finding shore. Cole felt his way along to the door. It was frozen shut, or blocked, or both. He kicked it once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th kick, it broke inward and they fell through into sudden absence of wind. The silence was deafening. Cole's horse stood in the corner, wild-eyed and terrified, but alive. The saddle was still on, the wool blanket underneath was dry. Cole's hands shook as he unbuckled the saddlebags. Inside, oilcloth folded neat, 3 emergency candles, matches in a waterproof tin, jerky, a small flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes, treasure. It was all treasure. Sarah was already pulling the blanket free. It was thick and heavy and smelled like horse, but it would burn slow and hot. "We have to go back," Cole said. They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They'd barely made it here alive. Going back meant trusting they could find the cabin again. But staying wasn't an option. The barn was cold as the cabin, colder maybe, and Cole's horse needed that saddle blanket more than they did, if he was going to survive till morning. Cole retied the rope, checked the knots, put the supplies in his coat, took Sarah's hand. "Same as before. You hold on. I count. We make it. And if we don't?" He looked at her direct. "We do. Because I'm not letting you die out here, Sarah. Not after everything." They stepped back into the storm. This time Cole counted backward from where they'd come, retracing steps through memory and hope. 16, 15, 14. The wind tried to push them off course. They leaned into it together. The rope between them stayed tight. 13, 12, 11. Sarah's legs were giving out. She could feel herself slowing down. Cole felt it too. He slowed his pace to match hers. 10, 9, 8. The torch had died in the barn. They were navigating blind, just counting and hoping and holding on to each other like drowning people clutching wreckage. 7, 6, 5. Sarah's foot hit something. She nearly went down. The rope caught her again. The cabin door. They crashed through it together. Sarah kicked it shut while Cole was already moving to the fireplace. His hands shook so bad he could barely strike the match. But it caught. He fed the oilcloth first. It burned hot and gave off toxic fumes, but they didn't care. The fire roared back to life. He lit the candles as backup, wrapped the wool blanket around Sarah's shoulders. They collapsed on the floor, soaked through, shaking from adrenaline and cold and the impossible fact that they were still breathing. The cabin filled with warmth and light and the smell of burning oilcloth. They'd made it. Sarah spoke first, her voice shaking. "You would have gone alone." Not a question. Cole didn't pretend otherwise. "Yes." "You would have died for me." "Probably." "Why?" He looked at her, really looked at her. "Because I couldn't save Rebecca, couldn't save Rose, and I'll be damned if I lose someone else He stopped himself, but Sarah heard what he didn't say. "Someone else you what, Cole?" He wouldn't say it. Too soon, too much, too raw. But his face said everything his mouth wouldn't. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years. "I don't know what this is," she said slowly. "I don't know what we are, but I know I don't want you to die." She paused, "And I know that's the first time in 3 years I've wanted anyone to live, including myself." Cole reached out, took her hand in his. "That's enough. That's more than enough. Not love yet, maybe not ever, but something real, something worth staying alive for." Outside, the wind began to quiet, just a little. The first sign that the storm might break. They sat together by the fire they'd nearly died to save. 2 people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten what together felt like. But they were learning. And that was everything. The storm broke just before dawn. Sarah woke to silence so complete it felt wrong, like the world had stopped breathing. Then she heard it, the crackle of fire, the sound of Cole moving quiet across the cabin floor. She opened her eyes. Gray light filtered through the gaps in the walls. The kind of light that comes after storms, when everything's been washed clean and strange. Cole was feeding the fire with careful pieces of the wool blanket. It burned slow and gave off smoke, but it was warm. The candles had melted to stubs. The oilcloth was long gone. But they were alive. "Storm passed," he said without turning around. He'd known she was awake. Hour ago, maybe less. Sarah sat up. Her whole body ached. Every muscle felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. But she was warm. The coats, both of them, were still piled on top of her. Cole was wrapped in nothing but his vest and the torn blanket. "You gave me... you needed them." He finally looked at her. His face was drawn with exhaustion. His eyes had shadows under them that spoke of a man who hadn't slept in 36 hours. "How you feeling?" "Like I got kicked by a horse?" She tried to smile. "But alive. That's enough." And he turned back to the fire. "That's all that matters." They spent the morning taking stock of what remained. The cabin was still standing, barely, but the walls had held, and the roof hadn't caved. Most of Sarah's possessions were burned for fuel. What was left could fit in a single saddlebag, but she had her life, and that was more than she'd had yesterday. Cole went outside to check on his horse. Sarah watched from the doorway. Snow had piled waist-deep against the cabin walls. The world was white and clean and brutal in its beauty. She was still wearing his coat. The thought hit her sudden. She'd been wearing it since he laid it on the fence post. Through her refusal. Through the storm. Through the night they'd nearly died. It smelled like both of them now. Wood smoke and leather and sweat and survival. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders. Cole came back carrying his saddlebags. His horse was alive, but exhausted. Would need rest before they could ride anywhere. Roads are probably impassable for a few days, he said. I'll need to stay, if that's... He paused. If that's all right with you. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been clenched tight for 3 years. I want you to stay. 4 words, but the way she said them, steady and sure, made them mean everything. Cole set down his bags. I brought coffee and some cornmeal. It's not much, but it's enough. She met his eyes. You're enough, Cole. He went still, like he didn't quite believe what he was hearing. Sarah crossed to him, slow, deliberate. She opened the coat, his coat that she was wearing, and made space inside it. An invitation, not romantic, just human. Cole understood. He stepped closer. She wrapped the coat around both of them. They stood there in the doorway, with the winter light streaming in and the fire crackling behind them, and the world outside, cold and clean and new. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. His arms came around her, gentle, respectful, like he was holding something breakable that he'd been trusted with. You're not broken, Sarah. You're just healing, and healing takes time. They worked through the day, making the cabin livable again. Cole chopped wood from a fallen branch near the barn. Sarah melted snow for water. They cooked thin coffee and cornmeal mush and ate it grateful. There was comfort in the work, in having tasks that kept their hands busy while their minds processed what they'd survived. Sarah watched Cole split wood, the methodical rhythm of it, the way he stacked each piece neat and careful, building something instead of tearing it down. You're thinking loud, he said without stopping work. Just watching. Watching me chop wood? Watching you build. She paused. Silas only ever tore things down. Gardens, hope, me. She looked at the growing woodpile. You build things, even when they're not yours. Cole set down the axe. Maybe that's the difference. What difference? Between a man who loves and a man who owns. He looked at her direct. Love builds. Ownership breaks. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes but didn't look away. I'm learning that. Late afternoon, Cole stood by the window looking out at the snow. His face had gone distant. You all right? Sarah asked. Just thinking about Rebecca and Rose. His voice was soft. Thinking that maybe... He stopped, started again. I showed up this time. I didn't leave you alone when it mattered. I know it doesn't fix what happened to them. But maybe I'm learning too. Sarah came to stand beside him. You think they'd be proud of you? I think... His voice caught. I think Rebecca would say I finally did what she always wanted me to do. What's that? Let myself care about someone again. He looked at Sarah. Even if it scared me. Even if I might lose them. She'd say that's what living is. Not hiding from loss. But staying open to love anyway. Sarah's hand found his. She sounds like she was wise. She was. And he squeezed her fingers. You would have liked her, and she would have liked you. The sun was dropping toward the horizon. Cole would need to leave soon. Check his ranch. Make sure his cattle survived. Sarah knew this but didn't want to say it. He said it for her. I need to head home. Check on things. But I'll come back. He turned to face her fully. 3 days. I'll bring proper supplies. Lumber, nails, food. Help you fix this place up right, if you want. There it was. The old fear trying to surface. What if he doesn't come back? What if this was just crisis bonding? What if... But then she looked at his face. At the honesty there. At the complete lack of expectation. He was offering, not claiming. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. They stood outside as Cole saddled his horse. The air was cold and clean. The sky had gone that particular blue that comes after storms. Sharp and bright and painful to look at. Sarah was still wearing his coat. She started to take it off. Keep it, Cole said. But it's yours. It's been yours since I put it on that fence post. He checked his cinch. Didn't matter if you wanted it then or not. It was always going to be yours when you were ready. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. The coat was his care. Not possessive, just present. Available when she needed it. She could take it or leave it. but it would always be offered. That was what real care looked like. "Thank you," she said, "for the coat, for everything, for showing up when she'd pushed him away, for staying when it would have been easier to leave." Cole mounted his horse, looked down at her. "See you in 3 days, Sarah." Not a question, a statement, a promise. 3 days, she agreed. He rode away slow through the deep snow. Sarah watched until he was just a dark speck against all that white. Then she went inside. The cabin was quiet, empty in a way it hadn't been for 2 days. But it wasn't the same emptiness as before. Before, alone meant isolated, trapped, forgotten. Now alone just meant having space between visits. Sarah looked at the fire Cole had built before leaving, at the woodpile he'd stacked, at the coat she was wearing that smelled like both of them. For the first time in 3 years, she thought about the future, not with dread, but with something that might, in time, become hope. She touched the coat, felt its weight on her shoulders, real and warm and freely given, and she smiled. The 3 days alone were harder than Sarah expected. Old thoughts crept back in, thoughts that sounded like Silas's voice even though he'd been dead over a year. He won't come back. Why would he? You're nothing but trouble and hard edges. She tried to ignore them, kept busy patching walls with mud and straw, melting snow for water, rationing the cornmeal Cole had left. But every time she heard hoofbeats on the wind, which turned out to be just wind, her heart would jump and then sink when no one appeared. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, she'd convinced herself she'd been wrong about everything. That the storm had been crisis. That Cole had realized, riding home, that saving her wasn't the same as wanting to know her. She was standing in the doorway watching the empty road when she heard it. Real hoofbeats, not wind, not imagination. Cole Maddox rode into her yard, leading 2 pack horses so loaded with supplies they looked like traveling merchants. Sarah's throat went tight. He'd come back. Cole swung down from his horse and started unloading before she could find words. Lumber, bags of nails, a hammer and saw, flour, coffee, salt, sugar, dried beans, a new wool blanket still in its wrapping. "Ran into Eleanor at the store," he said, stacking supplies by her door. "She sent the coffee and sugar, said to tell you that you're welcome in town anytime. Said some of us remember what it's like to be scared." Sarah's eyes stung. That's kind of her. She's a good woman. He pulled out one more item, a cloth bag that rustled when he set it down. "Thought you might want these." What are they?" "Garden seeds." He looked almost shy saying it. "Spring's coming in a few months. Thought maybe you'd want to plant something, start fresh." Sarah stared at the bag, at this man who'd nearly died saving her, who'd ridden home and spent 3 days gathering supplies, who was thinking months ahead, like he assumed, like he believed she'd still be here, that he'd still be checking on her, that she had a future worth planting for. "Will you help me plant them?" Her voice came out smaller than she meant. "Yes, ma'am. Though, I should warn you, I don't know much about gardens. Rebecca was the one with the green thumb. Then we'll learn together." She used his words back at him. "Make mistakes together. Figure it out as we go." Cole smiled, real and warm, and reaching his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. "I'd like that." They spent the afternoon building. Cole showed Sarah how to measure and cut lumber for a simple chair. Her first attempts were clumsy, angles wrong, cuts crooked. "Little to the left," he said, patient. "There. Now hold steady while I—" The board slipped. The joint came apart. Sarah laughed, actually laughed, at her own incompetence. Cole stopped working. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just—" He was staring at her like she'd done something miraculous. "Nice to hear you laugh." Sarah went quiet, but it wasn't the defensive quiet from before. Nice to have reason to. They went back to work. She handed him nails. He handed her the hammer. They worked in rhythm like they'd done this 100 times before, like they'd do it 100 times more. The chair came together slowly, rough but solid. "Test it," Cole said. Sarah sat. The chair creaked, but held. "Not bad for a first try," he said. "Not bad for 2 people who don't know what they're doing. Best kind of people to learn with." That evening they sat outside on the chair they'd built together. Took turns because it only held one person, and watched the sun go down. Sarah was still wearing Cole's coat. Would probably wear it until it fell apart. It had become part of her somehow, like armor that actually protected instead of just weighing her down. "Cole?" "Yeah?" "Why do you keep coming back?" It was the same question from before. But this time, she asked it different. Not defensive. Just curious. He thought about it. "Because I like who I am when I'm around you." What do you mean?" "I mean," he paused, choosing words careful. "I spent 3 years being a ghost in my own house. Going through motions. Doing chores because they needed doing, not because they mattered. But when I'm here, he looked at her. When I'm helping you build something, or fix something, or just sitting on a crooked chair watching the sun go down, I feel like a person again, not just a ghost carrying grief. Sarah understood that. You make me feel like a person too. Not just something that survived, but something that might actually live. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned colors they didn't have names for. I should probably head home, Cole said finally. Come back in a few days, unless... He hesitated. Unless what? Unless you need something sooner, I could come by tomorrow, check on things. Make sure you're... Cole. She stopped him. I'm fine. You don't have to check on me every day. His face fell just slightly. But I'd like it if you did, she smiled. I'd like it a lot. The relief in his expression was almost funny. Yeah? Yeah. All right then. He stood, dusting sawdust off his pants. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon. We can work on that table you need. Maybe start planning where that garden should go. Sounds good. He mounted his horse, started to leave, then stopped and looked back. Sarah? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For letting me stay. He meant more than just physically. Meant in her life, in her space, in the slow, careful work of building something neither of them had words for yet. Thank you for staying, she said back. After he left, Sarah went inside. The cabin felt different now. Less like a prison she'd locked herself in, and more like a home she was building. She looked at the chair, at the lumber stacked neat for tomorrow's table, at the bag of garden seeds sitting on the windowsill, catching last light. She picked up the seeds, turned them over in her hands, thought about spring, about things growing, about planting something in earth that had been frozen and believing it would bloom anyway. It felt like faith, small and fragile and terrifying. But she was learning that faith didn't mean having no fear. It just meant planting seeds anyway. She set the bag back on the windowsill where morning sun would find it, and for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Dawson went to sleep thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday. 6 weeks later, early spring. The morning came soft and gold. Sarah and Cole worked in the garden plot behind her cabin, ground soft enough now to turn, snow mostly gone, except in shadows where the sun couldn't reach. She dug holes with a spade he'd brought. He dropped seeds careful, spacing them like the packet said. She covered them with dark earth. He watered from a bucket, pattern, rhythm, 2 people building something that would outlast winter. The cabin looked different now. New chair inside, solid table they'd built together, roof patched proper, walls sealed tight, woodpile stacked high, half from him, half she'd learned to split herself. Coffee pot on the stove, 2 tin cups on the shelf. His stayed there between visits. Cole came twice a week, helped with repairs, shared meals, slept in the barn because that's what respect looked like. Never pushed, never claimed. Just showed up steady as seasons. Sarah had changed too, smiled more, spoke easier. Accepted help without feeling like she'd lost something, said thank you without it weighing like debt. She was learning that dependence and partnership weren't the same thing. They stood back from the garden. Nothing showing yet, just rows of dark earth holding seeds and possibility. Think they'll grow? Cole asked. Sarah looked at the garden, at the cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, at Cole standing patient beside her, at herself, alive and choosing to stay that way. Yeah, she said. I think they will. She was still wearing his coat, but it wasn't his anymore or hers. It was theirs. Shared warmth, shared choice. The sun rose higher, full morning now. Gold light on garden, cabin, them. Cole turned toward his horse. Time to head back to his ranch. Cole? He stopped, looked back. See you Thursday? Simple question, simple answer. See you Thursday, Sarah? Not a promise of marriage, not a declaration of love. Just, I'll be here, you'll be here. That was enough. Some men stay because they claim you, some men stay because they choose you, and some women learn that accepting the second kind doesn't make you owned, it makes you seen. Sarah Dawson had spent 3 years building walls. It took one storm and one stubborn rancher to show her the difference between a prison and a home. Sometimes home is just knowing someone will show up on Thursday,